people who went missing. What happened?
I came home one day and found my girlfriend in bed with another man. It broke me. Without telling anyone, I just left my whole life behind. I spent the next year hitchhiking around, not staying in one place. Nobody filed a missing person report for me. No one searched for me. It seemed like no one even noticed I was gone. Story 2. When I was about 6 years old, I went on a little adventure. One day, while playing outside, I decided to visit the petting zoo. It was about 4 kilometers away from our house. I just took off on my own, wearing only my pajamas and no shoes. When I got to the zoo, the manager realized I was there alone. They called my parents to let them know where I was. I don't remember much about what happened, but looking back, it's pretty funny to think about. A little kid in PJs, barefoot, just showing up at a zoo by themselves. Story 3. When I was in Boy Scouts, my troop managed to lose me twice in one night. The crazy part? I was in my tent the whole time. We were camping at Camp Decorah in Iowa. The troop planned to raid the counselors' tents, but I wasn't feeling well. I told everyone, I'm not feeling good, so I'm going to sleep. They said okay and left without me. After their raid, they counted heads in the woods. I wasn't there, but they'd forgotten I stayed behind. Suddenly, I'm a missing camper. The whole camp started searching for me. Finally, someone thought to check our tents. They found me right where I said I'd be. But here's where it gets ridiculous. While that guy went to report I was found, I got up to use the bathroom. Someone else came to double check the tent and I wasn't there. So now I'm missing again. Luckily, they found me pretty quickly the second time. But can you believe it? Lost twice, and I never even left camp. Story 4. When I was 4, I got lost in the city. A group my dad thought was a gang ended up rescuing me. It all started after we had dinner in Chinatown with another family. There were 5 kids total. We were crossing the street all holding hands in a big chain. My older sibling let go of my hand. When the light changed, everyone crossed, but I stayed on the sidewalk. I was distracted by a barbershop window. A huge guy was getting his head shaved. I can still picture it clearly. When I finally looked around, everyone was gone. I started crying. A group of teenagers came up and asked if I was lost. I said yes. A tall kid put me on his shoulders and they all split up to search. We turned a corner and I saw my dad. He went pale and ran towards us. The tall kid put me down and explained what happened. My dad, who wasn't usually very emotional, hugged the teenager. My mum showed up and picked me up. Years later, my dad told me he'd seen these same kids earlier when we parked. He thought they might be a gang and was suspicious. After they helped me, he felt embarrassed and tried to be less judgmental. I wish I could thank those guys now. This happened a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it. Before delving into the next regrettable recap, please remember to like and subscribe if you'd like us to create more of this content. Thank you. Story 5. A few years ago, I was working in Manhattan in an 11-story building. One day, after a smoke break, I got in the elevator and found a young blonde girl about 11 years old crying inside. I asked what was wrong, but she couldn't speak English. It sounded like Polish. She came out of the elevator looking at me with fear in her eyes. I noticed she was dressed strangely for her age. High heels, a really short skirt, and lots of makeup. All she kept saying was 7 inches and uncle. I was completely confused and didn't know what to do. I work on the 7th floor, so I took her to my office, hoping someone would recognize her. No one did. We went floor by floor, asking if anyone knew her. Still nothing. I was about to call the cops when we reached the 11th floor. There we found out her uncle had an office. When she saw him, she ran to him, screaming and crying. He looked at me like I was some kind of creep. I quickly explained what happened. Turns out, her aunt had dropped her off at the building, given her the wrong floor number and left. The poor kid had been terrified and lost this whole time. Story 6. When I was about 3 years old, my parents took me to the zoo. They had very negative views about black people back then. During our visit, I spotted a big slide that looked like a snake. I really wanted to go on it, but my parents were busy talking and didn't notice when I wandered off. I got completely lost trying to find the snake slide. When my parents finally found me, I was with a kind black woman. She had been walking me all around the park, trying to help me find my family. My parents were so relieved and grateful that they both gave her a big hug. This experience completely changed how they viewed black people. It just goes to show how kindness can break down false beliefs and prejudices. Story 7. I was eating at a burger place on Waikiki Beach with my family. We sat by an open window facing a side street. A big white van pulled up across the road near some bushes. 2 guys got out and unloaded a bunch of colourful macaws, at least 10 of them. They let the birds play in the bushes while they had lunch. Another man who seemed to be their boss came by, gave some instructions, and went to the beach. The van guys finished eating, loaded up the birds, and left. About 10 minutes later, we noticed one bright green bird was left behind in the bushes. Our waiter said those birds cost thousands of dollars. After we finished eating, we went to check on the bird. It was friendly and came right up to us. We decided to try finding the boss on the beach. My sister held out a stick and the bird hopped onto it, then climbed up to her shoulder. We barely walked a block when the boss, a Filipino man, came running up yelling, "My bird, my bird!" He seemed to think we'd taken it. We explained that his guys had left it behind. Once he understood we were bringing it back to him, he was super grateful. He even paid for our hotel stay, so I guess he was pretty rich. Story 8. When I was in the US Air Force, I experienced a bizarre 12-day period of dissociative amnesia. It happened out of nowhere. One Sunday night, I was doing laundry before starting some extra cleaning duty. The next thing I knew, 12 days had passed and my supervisor was shaking me awake in my dorm room. Nobody saw or heard from me during those 12 days. This was really strange because I wasn't a loner. I was very outgoing and people usually noticed me easily. How I vanished for almost 2 weeks is still a mystery to me. The Air Force considered me AWOL, absent without leave, and gave me an Article 15 punishment. Eventually, they medically separated me with a $25,000 severance. An Air Force psychiatrist bluntly told me I was useless to the USAF. Despite trying various medications and therapy, they couldn't figure out what happened. The doctor said this kind of thing doesn't usually happen to people in their late 20s, but it did to me. A brain scan showed I had an unusually large hole that everyone has, whatever that means. I never dug deeper into what might have happened during those missing days. Part of me doesn't want to know if I did something crazy or just wasted 2 weeks. I had no reason to desert. I'd been in the Air Force for over 6 years and had been stationed in Saudi Arabia, South Korea, France, Spain, and Germany. I loved being in the military and would do it all over again if I could. Story 9. I was on my high school football team in America. We had an away game in a not-so-great city. After the game, the bus took us back to our school. I couldn't drive yet and I was grounded. My parents had taken my phone away. I waited at the school for an hour and a half, but my parents never showed up to get me. So I decided to walk the 4 miles home, carrying all my football gear and school books. While I was walking, my mum came to the school to pick me up. When she didn't find me there, she panicked and told my coach. He sent a group text to the whole team asking if anyone knew where I was. The next day at school, everyone thought I'd missed the bus and gotten lost in that sketchy city. It became a running joke with the team for the rest of the year. The funny thing is, my parents never took my phone away again after that. I guess they realized it wasn't such a good idea after all. Story 10. When I was 10 years old, I had a scary sleepwalking experience. One night, I unlocked the front door and went for a walk around the neighborhood while completely asleep. I woke up a few hours later, standing in the middle of a street. I was barefoot in a cul-de-sac I'd never seen before. It scared the hell out of me. Panicking, I ran through the streets until I finally found my way back home. My parents had been freaking out, searching everywhere for me. After that incident, they put a lock on my bedroom door to keep me from going on any more midnight adventures while sleepwalking. Story 11. In 2010, I went hiking to see a volcanic eruption in Iceland. This was the one right before all those flights got grounded. On the way back, I got separated from a group of 8, 10 people, including a close friend. I walked pretty fast, especially going downhill. It was March in Iceland, so it gets dark early and quickly. I didn't have a flashlight, and within about 30 minutes, it was pitch black. I made a dumb decision to take the same path we used going up. This path was only about 5 meters away from a 15-meter drop into a canyon. To make it worse, there was a waterfall nearby. The mist from the waterfall covered the path, and since it was about -5 degrees Celsius without wind chill, that mist turned into basically an ice rink on a 45-degree angle. I was lost for about 5 hours before I finally made it down the mountain. It turns out I wasn't the only one in trouble that day. About 20 people got lost that Saturday, and sadly, 2 of them died. The Icelandic search and rescue teams were really busy that night. It was a scary experience I'll never forget. Story 12. One time when my grandfather was babysitting my younger sister and me, I decided to take a shower. I didn't think to tell anyone, I just went and did it. I took my time, enjoying a nice long shower. When I came out, the house was empty. Confused, I went outside to see if they were in the yard, since it was summer and a nice evening. What I found was crazy. My grandfather and sister had told the neighbours I was missing. The whole neighbourhood was out looking for me. The funniest part? My shower wasn't even that long. It just goes to show how quickly things can get out of hand when people think a kid is missing. Story 13. In 1999, my friend and I went to the Love Parade in Berlin, Germany. We were 20 and had no real plans. We partied all weekend, sleeping in alleys, parks, and eventually crashing at a guy's hotel room. On Sunday, the train station was packed with 1 million people trying to leave. We got separated in the chaos. I showed my ticket to a worker, got a nod, and boarded what I thought was the right train. The train was insanely crowded. I fell asleep on the floor, surrounded by hungover ravers. When I woke up, I realised I'd been on the train for 4 hours, way too long. Turns out I was on the wrong train heading west, not south to our school. I got off at a tiny station in the middle of nowhere. I didn't speak German, had no money, and no contact info for where I was staying. I spent hours trying to figure out how to get back, hiding on trains to avoid paying, and sleeping behind a station. At one point, I got caught by a ticket inspector. Despite the language barrier, he was pissed but let me off with a warning. Finally, after nearly 24 hours, I made it back to our dorm. My friend was just out of the shower, casually saying he was about to report me missing. We're still best friends 15 years later. Looking back, I'm not sure if I'm glad he didn't report me missing or annoyed that he waited so long. Story 14. When I was a kid, my brother and I used to go to this cool gymnastics play area. It had trampolines, swinging bars, and even a tightrope over a pit full of foam pieces. One day, we decided to play hide and seek. I hid first. About an hour later, the place was closing. My mum asked my brother where I was. He just said we were playing hide and seek and I'd hidden really well. 3 hours after that, things got crazy. The staff had locked all the doors and called the police. My mum was panicking. My brother had given up looking for me and was just bouncing on a trampoline. The staff were tearing the place apart trying to find me. Finally, my brother got bored of the trampoline and decided to play in the foam pit. He jumped in and heard a loud ouch. I climbed out of the foam and asked, "Did I win?" Needless to say, we never went back to that place again. I guess I was a little too good at hide and seek. Story 15. I went to a college house party with some friends. This was before I had a cell phone. I held out until 2004 and our dorm room still had landlines back then. At the party, I ended up going home with a guy for a hookup. The next morning, I used his computer to check my email. I was shocked to find a ton of frantic messages from my friends. They thought something terrible had happened to me. Some worried I'd been abducted or drugged. Others feared I might have hurt myself, since I was dealing with pretty bad depression at the time. My friends had actually filed a missing person report with campus security. Some of them were even out searching for me in the woods. Story 16. I got way too drunk at my buddy's house one night. I went to get my phone from his car, but that's the last thing I remember. I woke up hours later with about 5 cops standing over me, yelling at me to quit resisting. Turns out, in my drunken state, I'd wandered through 2 gates, across a front porch, and into his neighbour's basement. When the cops found me, I was naked and snuggling with the neighbour's 2 Rottweilers on their basement floor. The cops said I was lucky the dogs didn't eat me. I was even luckier I didn't get shot. This happened in a rough neighbourhood near East St. Louis. I got arrested for felony breaking and entering. Fortunately, the cops ended up being cool about it. My buddy's elderly neighbours were just freaked out by a drunk, naked white guy sleeping with their dogs in their basement. My friends had no clue where I was until I called from jail the next afternoon. My buddy was great and bailed me out. In the end, all charges were dropped. When I went to court, the attorney and judge just made fun of me and asked if I'd learned my lesson. It was a crazy night that could have ended much worse. Definitely learned to watch my drinking after that. Story 17. When I was 15, my friend and I went through a terrifying ordeal. We were drugged and abducted for 3 days, constantly moved around our state. During those 3 days, we were repeatedly separated, reunited, drugged and abused both emotionally and physically. We truly feared for our lives. We never stayed in any homes. They made us sleep outside in the woods with thin blankets, always apart from each other. It was winter, though luckily there wasn't snow. There were 2 abductors. The one who kept me seemed less cruel, more of a follower. He was gentler, but the experience still left me with lasting trauma. Certain names, accents, and looks still trigger me. On the 3rd day, they abandoned us on a mountainside about 40 miles from home, in the middle of nowhere. They threatened us not to call the police. Some hunters found us. They thought we'd been attacked because we looked so bad. I was a mess, acting defensively because I didn't trust that they wanted to help. When the police finally arrived, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. I just broke down crying and told my friend we'd be okay. They caught the guys about a week later. They pleaded guilty for reduced sentences. The drugs they gave us made a lot of the details hazy. I still have scars, both physical and emotional. My friend turned to drugs to cope, and we've lost touch. It was a horrific experience that's had lasting impacts on both of us. Story 18. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, I went on a camping trip with my dad and brother. We were spending time at the beach one day. I got really interested in picking up bird feathers on the sand. I was so focused on my little feather hunt that I didn't notice when my dad, brother, and the rest of our camping group headed back to the campsite. I just kept on collecting feathers, not realizing I'd been left behind. After a while, my dad suddenly remembered he'd forgotten me at the beach. He rushed back in a panic, probably imagining all sorts of scary scenarios. When he found me, I was still there, happily picking up feathers. I had quite a collection in my hands by then. I guess you could say I didn't so much go missing as I got forgotten. It's funny now, but I bet my dad was pretty worried for a while there. Please like and subscribe if you would like more of this content in the future. Now it's time for Today I Effed Up stories. Story 1. Today I effed up by ignoring my Roomba's cries for help, and now it's missing. Let me explain how I lost my robot vacuum, a shark, which is basically the same as a Roomba. I had named it Shithead in the app, and looking back at its final days, I feel terrible about ignoring its desperate pleas for help. It started with notifications about problems with its side wheels. I ignored them, figuring it would sort itself out like it always had before. Then came the message about its brush roll being stuck, begging me to clear the hair and debris. I didn't even bother checking the app at this point. I never really gave it the respect it deserved. The final message was a desperate cry about its battery being close to zero, pleading to be placed on its dock. A week passed before anyone noticed something was wrong. My parents asked if I'd seen Shithead, and I casually responded that it was probably under my bed. But when I checked, nothing. We searched the other bedrooms, then frantically combed every corner of our house. Still nothing. The next day, we checked the app and discovered something bizarre. In its final moments, Shithead had apparently been cleaning for 81 minutes but covered 0 square feet. Absolutely zero. Now we're getting desperate. I'm too lazy to clean without my robotic helper, though eventually I'll have to, once I peel myself off either the couch or bed, whichever I choose to become one with. We've come up with some theories about Shithead's disappearance. Maybe it planned a daring escape, racing down our 50-foot driveway before either getting hit by a car and disposed of, or continuing its desperate journey another 0.3 miles until it died in a ditch still squirming. Or perhaps someone stole it in the dead of night, though they mysteriously left behind the docking station, plug, and everything else of value. Someone even suggested it might have no-clipped through reality into the back rooms, or whatever that is, and spent its final moments desperately cleaning in an attempt to return to our reality. Though I suspect that person was high and probably stole Shithead themselves. I can't help but feel like a terrible parent, child, and son to this robot vacuum. We ignored all its cries for help until it was too late. What am I supposed to do now? Story 2. Today I effed up by missing every sign on a date. Let me share what happened yesterday. I invited a close friend to the movies with me. Looking back now, after talking to another friend, I realised I completely missed multiple hints that she was interested in me. Before the movie, I jokingly texted her about a time when my friend and I got stranded in town for 4 hours, charging my electric car in front of the hotel. She responded, "Don't worry, if that were you and I, we'd make the most of it," with a wink face. I just laughed it off and didn't think about it further. On the drive home, she started telling me about her friends who know of every hidden, intimate spot between the country roads we were passing through, even pointing out a few locations. I casually replied, "I guess that's an interesting thing to know," with a laugh. She then glanced at my back seat and commented, "Yeah, there's not much you could do in my car though." I simply responded, "You know, probably not," and continued driving, oblivious to her implications. When we finally arrived at her house, she invited me inside for a soda, which I politely declined because I wasn't thirsty. It wasn't until later that I realised what all of these moments might have meant. Story 3. Today I effed up by missing obvious signs from a girl at a bar. Let me share what happened last night at the bar. I was out with some high school friends who live out of town. While waiting in line, we met 3 people, 1 guy and 2 girls. and I instantly clicked with them, particularly with one of the girls. After getting into the bar, I initially lost track of them when I went with my friends. Eventually they found me and she said, "OP, I missed you." We went to get drinks together and I'll admit I got pretty intoxicated. I don't go out often, so when I do, I tend to overdo it. While we were drinking and talking with my friends, things started getting interesting during my third or maybe fourth trip to the bar. She became very tactile with me, running her hands all over me, except for intimate areas. And I'm not talking about casual touches, she was really making herself at home in my personal space. This continued for several minutes until she asked me, "Hey, OP, grab my chest." Surprised, I responded, "Right here in public?" She enthusiastically replied, "Fuck yeah." So I did, rather tentatively at first, to which she said, "No, OP, grab it like you mean it." So I did, quite firmly. You know that SpongeBob episode where Squidward firmly grasps the pole? That was me. If I remember correctly, she whispered in my ear that she liked that. This was completely new territory for me. When I mentioned that we were planning to leave soon, she asked where we were heading. Not knowing the plan, I asked where she was going next. She replied, "Wherever you are," and grabbed my face. All I could manage to say was, "Oh, okay, cool, see ya." I walked her out and she took my hand, telling me she had a lot of fun with me before departing. Story 4. Today I effed up by missing the biggest hint a girl has ever dropped on me. A few days ago, I was in my advanced placement chemistry class, sitting at a table with a girl I have a huge crush on. We're good friends. And while working through a free response question, the other people at our table started discussing dating and relationships. Here's how it went. My crush's male, platonic friend asked about everyone's love lives. My crush immediately responded that hers was non-existent. Another friend, a girl who's somewhat close to my crush, went on a tangent about her dating history and past relationships. The male friend mentioned having mutual attractions, but nothing official. When it came to me, I made a programming joke about private static void. Yes, I'm socially awkward, but they understood what I meant. My crush turned to me and said, "Yay, we're partners," and we high-fived. Then the female friend asked if either of us had ever had mutual attractions with anyone. My crush explained that she occasionally makes moves since she knows guys can be shy, but usually gets no reaction. She's unsure if it goes over their heads or if they're just not interested. I responded that I didn't know. Maybe nobody had ever liked me that way, or I was too oblivious to notice, or wasn't paying attention because I didn't reciprocate their feelings, or any number of other possibilities. I mentioned that some old friends from my previous school told me a girl had a crush on me, but I had no idea and thought they were joking. Then my crush asked for help with a worksheet question. I told her to look at how I solved it, and she came to my side of the table, resting her head on my shoulder. So our heads were leaning against each other. I asked, "How would you tell if a girl likes you, romantically speaking?" She replied, "If she rests her head on your shoulders, that's a sign." I said, "So kinda like what you're doing to me right now?" She simply responded, "Yes." Somehow, this completely went over my head at the time. She hasn't responded to my texts since then. Mostly weird space facts, which is something we're both into. But she acts the same as always in class. Story 5. Today, I effed up by being mind-numbingly dense and missing a once-in-a-lifetime sexy time opportunity. Let me share a story from 6 years ago, though I only realised today how badly I messed up. I'm still cringing as I write this. I was 21 at the time and had just started dating a girl. Let's call her S, who was 19. She was in her rebellious phase, had recently moved out of her parents' house at midnight, loved partying, the usual. One Friday evening, S and her friends were at a club. The legal drinking age here is 18. And she texted me around 9 p.m. asking if I wanted to join them for a drink. I met her at the club about 30 minutes later. It wasn't much of a club. The kind of place that's been shut down, gone bankrupt, renamed, and reopened multiple times over the years. But it was close to my apartment, so it was my regular spot. I found S at a table with two friends. Let's call them the C's. They weren't her usual crowd, more like a friend and a friend of a friend. I met them briefly the week before. Being a few years older than everyone and S's new guy with the downtown apartment, I became the focus of conversation. Eventually, the discussion turned to wild sexual experiences, probably half true, half embellished. I was carefully navigating the conversation to avoid saying anything that might hurt my chances with S that night. When one of the girls directly asked if I'd ever had a threesome, I calculated between appearing endearing but vanilla or adventurous but playerish. I went with the safe and honest answer, no, but maybe someday. This seemed to work well, as S soon suggested we head back to my place. I quickly paid the bill, but when I got up to say goodbye to the C's, S mentioned they wanted to stop by for drinks too. Looking back now, you probably see where this is heading, but at the time I only worried about having to entertain two tipsy 19-year-olds, instead of being alone with S. Her look told me saying no wasn't an option, which I interpreted as her wanting to show off to her friends. Back at my apartment, we played Cards Against Humanity, shared more outlandish stories, and eventually moved on to strip poker at S's suggestion. Within 10 minutes, we were all naked, leading to that awkward post-strip poker moment. As I started to grab my clothes, one of the C's suggested another round of drinks. Being the only guy and not particularly shy, I volunteered to get them, earning some appreciative catcalls. While in the kitchen, the chatter became whispers. When I returned, one C said she was cold and asked about blankets from my bedroom. The other C immediately said she was cold too and suggested we all go get blankets. S started leading them to my room, but completely missing all the signs. The sex stories, threesome talk, strip poker, and naked girls asking to go to my bedroom. I suggested we just put our clothes back on to warm up. There was an awkward pause, followed by a clearly disappointed, okay from S. Everyone left shortly after, and S and I soon lost touch. Today I ran into her and she asked why I'd turned them down that night, saying it was every guy's fantasy. Confused, I asked what she meant. Turns out they had planned a foursome from the start. They were all interested in me since meeting the week before. When I explained I genuinely thought they were just cold, S was speechless before bursting into uncontrollable laughter. Meanwhile, I've been slowly dying inside ever since. Some things are better left unknown. Story 6. Today I effed up by buying a car with heated seats that burnt my ass. Let me share a story about how I, as a paraplegic since a military accident in 2004, recently made a significant error in judgment. I've always lived independently and taken meticulous care of myself, particularly my posterior, because sitting pressure combined with lack of sensation and decreased blood flow in paralyzed areas can cause devastating pressure sores that never heal. I pride myself on staying active and healthy. I perform daily skin checks using a mirror or phone camera, regularly change positions, and lift myself to promote blood flow. During my initial hospital stay after my injury, I witnessed fellow patients suffering from open, weeping sores that never healed. It terrified me. I'm proud to say I've never had a pressure sore despite maintaining an active lifestyle that includes skiing, kayaking, and even paragliding. When I was injured in 2004, I suffered an open book pelvic fracture along with numerous other injuries. Given the urgency of my condition, the medical team had to prioritize keeping me alive while putting me back together. As a result, my pelvis healed with a significant tilt to one side, making that side considerably lower and bearing most of my weight when sitting. The leg on that side appears 3 inches longer than the other. Recently, during a 3-hour drive home, that lower side of my pelvis was apparently pressing directly onto the heated element in my car seat. Although the temperature wasn't high enough to cause an immediate burn, I suffered what's called a low heat burn after the extended exposure. This is far more serious than it sounds. I could feel the warmth on my lumbar region, but never imagined it could cause a burn, even though I had cautiously turned the heat to the lowest setting. That evening, during my routine skin check, I discovered my worst nightmare, and it only got worse. What initially appeared to be a superficial injury developed into a softball-sized blister overnight. When it burst, it revealed something that looked like it belonged in The Walking Dead. 2 weeks later, the first layers of dead tissue are beginning to separate, and the skin is showing signs of healing. Now, my primary concern is the possibility of osteomyelitis and bone infection. Story 7. Today I effed up by getting the date wrong on my flight and consequently missing my only chance to go home for the holidays. I'm crying as I write this, so please forgive any errors. I mixed up the date on my flight. I was convinced it was departing Tuesday morning, so I spent Monday cleaning and packing. I was so certain that I only checked the times on the confirmation, not bothering to verify the dates properly. I had booked a flight home this month because tickets were much more affordable than during winter break, and my budget is tight. I was incredibly excited to go home since I hadn't seen my family in months, and this week would have been our longest time together. But I failed to check the date properly. I feel so foolish. Before going to bed, I checked my email one last time to review the flight details, and that's when I noticed 2 updates indicating my flight had already landed. Thinking it was an error, I double-checked the confirmation and discovered my massive mistake. Now I'm here, sobbing after calling the airline, only to learn I can't afford any of the available alternatives. Later, I learned the incredible power of human kindness. I was trying to fly from Dallas to Sacramento and had initially been anxious about going home due to my mental health history, family dynamics, and recent experiences, including time in a psychiatric ward. I didn't realize how much I needed this trip until my carelessness and universal karma took it away. But then something amazing happened. A kind soul named Greg helped me get home, asking only that I pay the kindness forward through good deeds, which I absolutely will do. The outpouring of support and love from complete strangers was overwhelming. Now I'm sitting in the back of my family's car, sipping tea my mum brought in a thermos, feeling incredibly grateful. To everyone who reached out about mental health and shared their own struggles, I'm amazed by the community's compassion. This experience has shown me how much love and kindness exists in the world, and I'm committed to passing it forward at every opportunity. Story 8. Today I effed up by missing an interview at Google and not realizing it until a year later. Years ago, I set up Google Alerts for various random interests and created a dedicated email folder where these alerts would automatically be routed. After a few months, I lost interest and stopped checking the folder. A couple of years later, I applied for a position at Google. When I never heard back, I assumed they weren't interested and moved on. About a year after that, while cleaning up my email folders and inbox, I discovered an unusually titled email in the alerts folder that didn't match the standard alert format. When I opened it, I found an email from Google asking about my availability for an interview. This was during Google's rapid growth period when employees were receiving stock options. The realization that I had missed such a life-changing opportunity simply because of poor email management was devastating. Story 9. Today, I effed up by missing the birth of my daughter. Let me tell you about something that happened yesterday at 2 a.m. My wife was pregnant, and since I work from home doing internet marketing, I don't get out much. She heard about an interesting local tech conference and suggested I attend. The conference was 2.5 hours away in a neighboring city. She was 37 weeks pregnant. Babies typically arrive at 40 weeks, but had been feeling great, so we didn't see any issue with me being away for one night. After all, what were the chances? My friend and I left for the conference at 1 p.m. Thursday for the evening networking event. Around 11 p.m. after the networking ended, we were having a beer before bed when my wife called. I think my water broke. What? Since we were still 3 weeks early, I dismissed it, suggesting she go back to bed. Quick searches on Dr. Google indicated that without contractions, and since she was otherwise feeling fine, it might just be pressure on her bladder from the baby. Nothing to worry about. 10 minutes later, I got a text. Contractions started, and they hurt like hell. Going to hospital now? She was home alone with no way to get to the hospital and was considering calling an ambulance. My friend offered to have his wife pick her up, which my wife agreed to. She was almost incoherent at this point, unable to talk or stand during contractions. We immediately grabbed our things and hit the road. 2.5 hours, we should make it in time for the birth. Labour usually takes 12 hours. No big deal. When she arrived at the hospital, they informed her she was fully dilated and the baby was already crowning. They rushed her into a room, too late for an epidural. My friend's wife got me on FaceTime and I watched my daughter being born from the passenger seat of a car. Total time from water breaking to delivery, 2.25 hours. I missed it by an hour. We arrived to find my exhausted wife and beautiful baby daughter. So the good news is I have a healthy baby girl. The bad news is I wasn't physically present. But she can't blame me because she's the one who sent me to the conference. Story 10. Today I effed up by masturbating myself to sleep by accident and missing out getting laid. I'd been talking to a woman for a couple of months after she added me through mutual friends on Snapchat. Recently she'd been sending me some rather explicit messages and I was interested since she's attractive and seemed to like me. We'd been trying to meet up for about a week, but our schedules hadn't aligned well. Yesterday was finally going to be our first meeting, and we both knew where things were heading. She sent me several suggestive photos of herself at work, and I was eagerly anticipating the end of my workday. I got home and started preparing. This is where I made my mistake. Since it had been quite a while since my last intimate encounter, I didn't want to disappoint. I decided to watch some adult content and take care of myself beforehand to ensure better performance later. However, what was meant to be a few minutes turned into nearly an hour. Afterward, exhausted, I fell asleep on the couch watching Netflix. I woke up when it was still dark outside, thinking I'd only napped for an hour. When I checked my phone to see her message, I realized it was about 4:30 in the morning. I had been so thorough in my preparation that I'd passed out and missed the entire evening I'd been preparing for. Story 11. Today I effed up by missing my own graduation. Let me share how I managed to miss my own master's degree graduation. I had invited my entire family to attend, telling them all it was on Sunday because that's what I genuinely believed. My family members booked tickets, and cousins were planning to travel from across America to be there. This morning, I woke up at 11:30 and was casually scrolling through Instagram stories when I saw everyone in their graduation robes. My school's official account was also posting about people graduating today. Concerned, I went back to check the graduation dates email they'd sent a few weeks ago. And that's when reality hit me. I had completely missed my own graduation. I'm still lying in bed trying to comprehend the magnitude of my mistake. I have no idea how I'm going to explain this to all my family members who are planning to come see me walk. The worst part is that they've already booked tickets and made travel arrangements from all over the country. I missed my own graduation. Story 12. Today I effed up by missing a wedding by masturbating. Let me share a story about how I managed to miss a truly romantic wedding. Picture the perfect setting, a beautiful warm summer day, a grand white tent, a string quartet, and a friend who was a priest performing the ceremony for a couple from different countries. Guests had travelled from around the world using the wedding as an opportunity to visit a northern country. Then there was my foolish self. Half an hour before my family and I needed to leave for the ceremony, I decided to be responsible and shower so my hair would look nice. After shampooing and rinsing, I thought a bit of personal time couldn't hurt. How wrong I was. However, with water being a terrible lubricant and having only my imagination to work with, things took longer than expected as our departure time approached. Still needing to get dressed and not wanting to leave with unfulfilled desires, I became more aggressive in my efforts. Much more aggressive. Finally, release came, but so did something else entirely unexpected. Just as I was experiencing the pleasure of climax, I was struck with the most excruciating headache of my life. It felt like my head was exploding, as if a blood vessel in my brain had burst. Barely able to see, I managed to turn off the shower, dry myself, and put on some underwear. The pain only intensified, so I stumbled outside to lie down on a lounger in our rental house's garden. My mother came outside, concerned but reminding me we needed to leave. All I could do was moan headache with my eyes closed. Seeing how severe it was, she suggested waiting 5 more minutes to see if I improved. Those 5 minutes felt eternal, and of course I didn't get better. My family ultimately decided to leave without me, and I missed the wedding ceremony. I did manage to make it to the reception later after sleeping off the pain. Story 13. Today I effed up by having a scary dream. Let me share one of my sister's favourite childhood memories of me. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, I had a scary dream and couldn't sleep, so I quietly crept into my mother's bed without her noticing and fell asleep. When my mother woke up in the morning, she casually flicked her blanket off, inadvertently covering me completely, and went downstairs to the kitchen. After I didn't appear for a while, she went looking for me in my room but couldn't find me. Panicked, she began searching every room in the house, coming up empty each time. There was no sign of me in the garden or out front. Soon the whole family was running around, checking every possible spot a small child could fit into, growing increasingly worried by the second. My mother's room was quite sparse, and apparently the heap of blankets covering me didn't show any child-shaped outline, so they kept missing my deeply sleeping form. After several hours, the police had arrived and were filling out a missing persons report, taking down all possible identifying details. I wish I could remember everyone's reactions when sleepy me walked downstairs into a room full of extremely stressed and concerned people. But my sister tells me it was one of the best things she ever witnessed. My mother experienced every emotion at once, and the police were simply relieved I was fine. I was confused, but not nearly as confused as everyone else. That day, my family learned both how terrible they were at hide and seek and just how soundly I could sleep through chaos. Story 14. Today, I effed up by missing a voicemail where a girl confessed her feelings for me. Let me tell you about how I ruined a potential relationship by forgetting to check a voicemail. A girl from one of my classes matched with me on Tinder a couple years ago during lockdown. We'd only ever seen each other on Zoom before that, and I'd been kicking myself for not getting her number when the course ended. Thanks to Tinder, we got a second chance to connect. The chemistry was instant. We texted constantly for days with great banter. When we finally met in person, it felt completely natural, like meeting an old friend. The only complication was that I couldn't do anything physical because my grandmother, who was medically vulnerable, was living with me. I couldn't risk bringing COVID into the house, so we stuck to outdoor dates. Despite this limitation, we had a great time together. One night after a date, she left me a voicemail. Here's where I messed up. I forgot about it the next morning and never listened to it. Over the following weeks, while we continued talking, I noticed she became more reserved. Eventually, she stopped communicating altogether. Fast forward to this year, we reconnected and I was thrilled to have another chance. However, I noticed she still seemed distant and grew increasingly emotionally unavailable. Finally, I confronted her about it, explaining that I wanted to date but needed to understand what was happening between us. She laughed and said, "So now you want a relationship, but you turned me down when I told you the same thing." I had no idea what she meant. Unfortunately, she refused to see me again, and I'm certain the relationship is now over. Today, while cleaning out my full voicemail inbox after doctors complained about not being able to leave messages, I found her unread voicemail. It was 3 minutes long. In it, she sang a silly love song and confessed she was falling for me. She seemed a bit drunk because she thought it was a phone call and kept asking why I wasn't answering. Story 15. Today I effed up by trying to bang a goth baddie and my wife found out. Let me share a story about how my fantasy of meeting a goth girl went hilariously wrong. For context, my wife and I have been together since high school and have a healthy, happy relationship. We'd previously agreed to allow each other a few hall passes since we're committed to spending our lives together, but acknowledge missing out on other experiences. We've both used one before with no issues. In fact, it's strengthened our appreciation for each other. Recently, I travelled to London for work and decided to extend my stay to explore the city. My wife couldn't join due to a lack of vacation time, but supported my solo adventure. Being budget conscious and sociable, I opted to stay in a hostel to meet other travellers. I met several interesting people, including an attractive French woman in her mid-20s who dressed in a goth style. Now, I'm particularly drawn to the goth aesthetic, something I frequently mention to my wife, who occasionally humours me by wearing goth outfits despite it not being her style. This French woman and I connected at the hostel's happy hour, discussing emo music and our favourite bands. She'd mentioned being recently single and seemed somewhat flirty, though I tried not to read too much into it. Later, we ended up sharing the communal sink in the co-ed bathroom. She was wearing a notably low-cut top and suddenly closed the bathroom door behind us. My heart started racing. It seemed like my wildest fantasy was about to come true. The semi-public setting added an extra thrill, and the fact that she'd made such a bold move was incredibly exciting. I couldn't believe my luck. Then she turned around and asked, "Are you interested in learning about our Lord and Saviour Jesus Christ?" She proceeded to corner me for 10 minutes, attempting to convert me to Christianity while I experienced the most severe emotional whiplash of my life, going from what could have been a crowning moment to pure dejection. When I told my wife this story, she laughed for a solid hour, saying it was karma for constantly pestering her about wanting a goth girlfriend.